right, students, going to be lecturing over Chapter 9, Jacksonian America. Okay, and this is also known as an era of mass politics. Okay, this sees a period of rise in mass politics. The age of Jackson is a time when more white males are participating in politics and also voting more. Property requirements and tax paying requirements disappeared in many states. Voting did not extend to women or African Americans or Native Americans, however. Western states are gaining, are becoming more prominent. Are gaining and growing in their population size. The Dorr Rebellion takes place. This is in Rhode Island. Conservatives are forced to adopt a new constitution that expanded suffrage to all white males after this. Okay. Now, presidential electors, 1828. All states except South Carolina allowed for a popular vote of electors that would vote for the president. More people are voting than ever in the age of Jackson. In 1824, 27% of adult white males are voting. In 1828, 58% of adult white males are voting. In 1840, 80% of adult white males are voting. Now, a work and a thesis during this time, Democracy in America, written by Alex de Tocqueville, he argues that America lacked these typical aristocracies that European nations had, and that people could rise and fall, that this is where the rags to riches story in American history really comes from. And if you look at Jackson, for example, he is that story. He's an orphaned. He, his father dies, I believe, before he's born. His brother dies in the American Revolution. His mom also passes away. So he's just an orphan at one point, completely penniless, but ends up becoming the president of the United States. Now, the second party system, okay, many people believe that the party system was necessary to democracy. Okay, loyalty to party lines was more important than ideology, essentially. Okay, now if you remember, Jefferson, what he had took part in what's called patronage, right? So, for example, James T. Callender, when he had went to jail for a year for Jefferson, he expected to be appointed the postmaster. Jefferson was doing those types of things. He just didn't appoint that guy. But that, if he would have, that would have been an example of patronage, and he expected that patronage as Callender. So Andrew Jackson encouraged loyalty through what we call at this time the spoils system, and this is how he rewards his supporters with federal jobs. Jacksonian Democrats are led by Andrew Jackson, and the Whigs at this time are led by Henry Clay. Okay, let's start talking about Andrew Jackson as president. Okay, Jackson is the first president that is from the West, and he's known as the common man president. He wanted equality for all white males, was against wealthy Eastern establishment. And at the National Party Convention, Jackson is re-nominated for president. This replaces the Congressional Caucus. John C. Calhoun, vice president under John Quincy Adams, and he is also vice president during Jackson's first term in office. He served 8 consecutive years as vice president under 2 different men. So interesting there. Remember, we talked about Calhoun being a war hawk, and he will be around all the way until the debates at the onset of the Civil War. Now, Jackson's informal group of advisors are known as the Kitchen Cabinet. It's made up of newspaper journalists, close friends of Andrew Jackson who helped and advised him. Many people in Congress did not like this Kitchen Cabinet group of informal advisors. Now, there is a states' rights versus national power debate that takes place in January of 1830 at the Webster-Hayne debate. Hayne advocated for nullification of the tariff, and Webster for the power of the federal government. Daniel Webster is quoted as saying at this debate, "Liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable." The Jefferson Day Dinner of 1830, this is a fundraiser for Democratic Party on Thomas Jefferson's birthday. Remember, Thomas Jefferson didn't want people celebrating his birthday, but here we are, and used it to raise some money. "Our federal union, it must be preserved." That is a quote here. And Jackson was a nationalist. Okay, he's not a states' rights advocate. He said, in saying our federal union, it must be preserved, he said the union first, liberty second, while Calhoun said the opposite. Okay, so you have this issue with the president and vice president not getting along yet again. And this is basically a public declaration of war between a president and vice president when this sort of goes down, okay, due to Calhoun's views. Calhoun will go on to encourage nullification in his state as well. And it's just there's some feuding that's going to go on between Jackson and Calhoun that we'll talk about a little more in a moment. Now, the Eaton affair or Petticoat affair, okay, this involves Secretary of War John Eaton, and this is under Andrew Jackson, okay. Eaton lived in a boarding house, okay. Remember, D.C. has lots of boarding houses where a lot of people live when Congress is in session, so on. Or you might just live in a boarding house, like, and that's where you live in D.C. and you're there year round. So he had been seen around town with the daughter of the boarding house owner in 1829, 1830. Her name was Peggy Timberlake. Now, her husband had met an accidental death on a ship, and rumors of murder had begun circulating. Eaton was 20 years Timberlake's senior. Now, by this time, Rachel Jackson, Andrew Jackson's wife, had died. Okay. Now, Fluoride Calhoun, a Southern woman, wife of John C. Calhoun, and really the social orchestrator in D.C., refused to invite Mrs. Eaton now to anything social. Okay. So this daughter of the sporting house owner, her husband dies. She marries John Eaton very shortly thereafter. And this reminded Andrew Jackson of how Rachel had been treated. Okay, so if you watch that PBS documentary where Andrew Jackson, The Good, the Evil, and the Presidency, it goes into this. Like, basically, she ran off with Andrew Jackson, but she had been previously married and was separated from her husband. And they ran off together, and then they do return to society at some point. It's sort of a scandal, right? And the way this comes back up in the presidential election, and the way that Rachel is treated, she takes it very hard. And I mean, it basically, she dies like right before they get to the White House because of all of the stress and anxiety. And it's a sad story. So watch that documentary. It'll go a little more into detail than I'm doing here. And the documentary should be free and available for you on YouTube. But if you're a student in my class, you have access to it in Blackboard. Okay, so Jackson tells Calhoun to have his wife invite Mrs. Eaton. Okay. She's going to refuse to do this. This furthers this divide between Jackson and Calhoun. Okay. Calhoun's states' rights advocate. Jackson is a unionist. So Calhoun resigns in 1831, is elected to Senate the next year. Now, the second Bank of the United States, Nicholas Biddle was the president of the Bank of the United States during this time. Jackson said the elite were financially beating up the common man, And the value in the buying power of the dollar was declining. There's extreme inflation and the economy is in shambles. Federal government is not spending money on projects that benefit the states. Jackson did not believe the federal government should pay for internal improvements. Okay, so if you think about Henry Clay's American system, he believes that, and he has a method for it. Jackson vetoed a bill that was part of interstate commerce. The Mays bill, or the road bill, called for the government to pay for a highway from Maysville to Lexington. And in this instance, Jackson said that the government should not pay for localized specific improvements. Now, two groups to know about: hard money advocates. They favored payment with gold or silver, and the wealthy also favored this. Okay, so this is something, if you look back in American history, and if you look back into tax and financial history, we'll see that gold and silver is always a good investment. And then you have soft money advocates. These are people who favor using paper money. Okay, the poor and farmers would favor this. If you remember, I mentioned this a moment ago that the value of the dollar is declining. Jackson calls the Bank of the United States a hydra-headed monster. He hates the Bank of the United States. Okay, now specie refers to hard currency. That's that gold or silver I'm talking about. And people had to pay for government land in gold or silver due to the Specie Circular Act. In 1836, this act said that all payments for land must be made in gold and silver. This was another contributing factor to the Panic of 1837. As a result of these issues, in 1837, this major recession begins, which lasts until 1841. That's the Panic of 1837 I just mentioned. Over speculation, crop failures, panics in Europe all created this Panic of 1837, where hundreds of banks fail, unemployment grows, and prices of land drop. Now, Jackson vetoed the recharter for a third bank of the United States. This veto was done because he didn't like it, not because it was unconstitutional, if you remember the court case we talked about earlier. Jackson is trying to figure out a way to kill the bank. Jackson takes all government money out of the United States banks and puts them into pet banks in individual states. Roger B Taney, or Tawney, I've heard it pronounced both ways. This is Jackson's Secretary of Treasury, and he was part of this pet bank plan. He will be who replaces John Marshall as Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court in 1835. Now let's talk about the Nullification Crisis. Okay, now this started with tariffs. Okay, tariff of 1816, which equaled 20%. And the purpose of this was to protect American industry. Then there's the tariff of 1828. This is a 38% tax on 96% of imported goods. Southerners called this the tariff of abominations. They hate this. Guess who's a Southerner? John C. Calhoun. It did not benefit the South, and there were two groups were sold cotton. Okay, New England textile mills and Great Britain. Great Britain is a big consumer of Southern cotton. The South exported, and the North manufactured. The South had to pay a higher tax on imported goods that it could not produce, that the North could produce. So that's an issue. That's why they refer to it as the tariff of abominations. John C. Calhoun, he is vice president under Jackson for his first term, 1828 to 1831, from South Carolina. And he authored the South Carolina Exposition and Protest in 1828, arguing that states should nullify the tariff of abominations. And he argued that states created the federal government and had the ability to nullify federal laws. If a state disagrees with the law, they could nullify it within their borders. clause also, and the state also has a right to secede from the Union. Calhoun urged other states to nullify. South Carolina nullified tariffs of 1828 and 1832. South Carolina calls a nullification convention. South Carolina nullified the law and chased the U.S. customs officials out of the state. Jackson is furious. He said to hang every nullifier from the tallest trees in the state. Henry Clay steps in and introduces the tariff of 1833 to gradually reduce tariffs to 10% over 8 years in a compromise. Clay definitely saved the day here. And this is the second of 3 great compromises that he will come up with. Now, the country was on the brink of the Civil War, and South Carolina is threatening secession. If you fast forward to the Civil War, South Carolina is the first state to secede from the Union. Jackson, after this, introduces the Force Bill of 1833, which said that the president can use military force to make people obey the law. This is passed in law form. Jackson signed it the same day the tariff of 1833 passes. Jackson distrusted Calhoun for his part in the Nullification Crisis, and that is a little bit more of the backstory on Calhoun's first term in office and his feud with Jackson and why he would resign as vice president and become a senator. Now let's talk about Indian removal, and then we'll make a few comments on Martin Van Buren and also some concluding thoughts here, okay? Now, Jackson advocated for the removal of Native Americans west of the Mississippi River, okay? 5 civilized tribes, they lived in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. Okay, these are tribes that are going to be, they have more agriculture. They may speak or have newspapers in their own language, like Cherokee and English. They often live in houses, right? They may even have adopted Protestant Christianity as their faith. So that is, when I refer to the civilized tribes, those are the elements of civilization that they one or all have that I'm referring to. Cherokee would be one example, okay? The Indian Removal Act is passed in 1830 in an attempt to move these southern tribes west of the Mississippi River. Now, you remember Andrew Jackson has fought wars with the Creeks in central Alabama, and he also, like many people, and we mentioned this in a previous lecture, he has a big interest in that area is great for cotton plantations. And Jackson he acquired some land that he took from the Creeks, put a cotton plantation on it, right? Worcester v. Georgia, 1832. This is a decision which the Supreme Court stated that Native Americans could not be forced to move. Andrew Jackson says this, President to Chief Justice Supreme Court: John Marshall made his decision, now let him enforce it. Jackson does not follow Marshall's ruling, and the Trail of Tears is a result. In the winter of 1838, the forced removal of thousands of natives takes place. 1/8 of them died during the journey or shortly after their arrival to Indian Territory. They marched the natives more than 1,200 miles to Indian Territory. They suffered from whooping cough, typhus, dysentery, cholera, and starvation all along the way. Historians estimate more than 5,000 of them died as a result. 5,000 Cherokee, rather, died as a result of the journey. And each of these tribes that were moved experienced similar conditions. Some were moved in phases. Now, the Charles River Bridge versus the Warren Bridge, 1837, Roger B. Taney states that contracts can be breached if they benefit the community. In essence, he reverses the Dartmouth College v. Woodward decision here. The Whigs formed, and they favored, so sort of led by Henry Clay, and they favored a strong central government and favored promoting industry and internal improvements, especially in the West. This is a part of Henry Clay's American system approach. There is an anti-Mason party. This is the first third party in the United States. They are anti-secret society. Andrew Jackson and Henry Clay were both Freemasons. Martin Van Buren, he is the 8th president of the United States. Van Buren had served as Jackson's Secretary of State and Vice President during his second term. He is from old wealth and a prominent New York family. He was born in 1782. He could speak Dutch. He spoke Dutch actually as a first language. He learned English as a second language, and had been a lawyer previously. And he noticed Jackson as a political force early on and followed him and built him up. Van Buren's time in office was difficult due to the economic issues from Jackson's second term in office. Van Buren often rode horses with Jackson in the mornings. He escorted Mrs. Eaton while Mr. Eaton was out of town. And he is president from 1837 to 1841, sworn in March 4th, 1837, amid the Panic of 1837. And one of the worst recessions in the history of the country. And he refused to allow the government to take control and attempted to establish an independent treasury. This was an attempt to keep government money out of banks. This ultimately cost him his reelection, and he was blamed for the economic issues, and he spends virtually his entire time in office trying to fix these economic issues. Again, more than 4,000, maybe as many as 5,000 Cherokees died in the march along the Trail of Tears during his presidency. He continued moving Native Americans from the east to the west of the Mississippi River to settle Indian Territory as an extension of Jackson's policies. He turned down Texas's request to join the Union as a slave state. This pleased the North. He was against slavery, but supported it in states where it already existed. This pleased the South. The Second Seminole War in Florida is launched. He used peaceful means to mitigate problems at home and internationally. He runs as a Democrat in the election of 1840 against William Henry Harrison. Harrison and John Tyler run against Van Buren with slogans like Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Also Van, a used up man, and also get the ball rolling is a popular saying in American culture that comes from this campaign. Harrison runs a modern image-based campaign depicting a tough young military man standing in front of a log cabin. However, at 68 years old, he is the oldest president ever elected. He's also a plantation owner. John Tyler was Harrison's vice president and was not a Whig. He was a Democrat and from Virginia and very popular. Tyler hated Andrew Jackson. 30 days into his presidency, Harrison dies and John Tyler becomes president. And he is nicknamed His Ascendancy because he was the first president to take office due to the death of a previous president. The age of Jefferson and the age of Jackson in conclusion. So that's what this whole unit we've been working on is about, right? And this is at a university upper level course. Oftentimes you'll see offered the age of Jeffersonian and Jacksonian democracy, right? So let's talk about those in comparison and in conclusion. Okay. Jeffersonian and Jacksonian democracy are both very similar. They both favored the common man and the common people. They both thought these groups should be the biggest influence on government, not wealthy aristocrats. But they were both, but they were in a way both also wealthy aristocrats, both white slave-owning men, and there are exceptions in their personal lives, right? So Jefferson's political views: separation of church and state. He's a deist. He's anti-monarchy. Democratic Republican Party, which he founded in opposition to the Federalist Party and Alexander Hamilton. Put priority on yeoman farmers, planters, and plain folk, deeply committed to American republicanism and opposed to aristocracy in any form. He believed in the social contract, and his ideas dominate American politics from 1800 to the 1820s and continued to be influential into the 1930s as a political philosophy. Jeffersonian democracy gives rise to Jacksonian democracy. Let's talk about Andrew Jackson and his Jacksonian 19th century political philosophy. This is democracy for the common man. Its height is 1828 to 1854 and emerged when the Democratic Republican Party became factionalized in 1824. Jackson and his supporters, like Jefferson, founded the Democratic Party. Their rivals created the National Republican Party under John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. Other anti-Jacksonians formed the Whig Party. Jackson wanted to end corruption of government elites, expanded democracy in the United States, and the power of the executive branch. So that's all for our Chapter 9 lecture over the Brinkley book. Thank you for listening and tuning in. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.